Welcome. I'm Ron Baker, and I am the director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Center. And this is us, Small Churches in Action podcast. And today we have a very special guest who comes from somewhere close to what it looks like in the background behind him. I'm going to ask him to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about who he is and maybe who put that beautiful piece together. Now, where did that come from? Take it away, Kevin.
Hello, I'm Kevin Driver. I'm the pastor of Banff Full Gospel Church. The artwork behind me is of Mount Assiniboine and Lake Magog, which is a full day hike from Sunshine Meadows. And I've personally never been there, but I've been on many hikes where I've seen this view. And this is just upstairs in our church. Banff Full Gospel Church is a small church in a rural resort town, and our church is what I would call intercultural or international. Our town is made up of 90 different nationalities, and so we have about 14 different nationalities represented in the church.
You have a very unusual small church.
Yes.
Yes, I would say, and I presume
in a very unusual town.
Yeah, exactly, and a hot spot and all that sort of stuff, depending on which health authority you listen to. So
yeah, it's we're waiting for some news this afternoon to see what will happen.
Yeah.
It changes quite rapidly here. So
which brings up a question that wasn't on our list here, but I'll get started with it anyways. How are you guys doing with COVID?
We've been doing, I would say, okay, but as the more I listen to other pastors and colleagues around me, I think we're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
We still meet in person. We'll see what happens this afternoon. And we've been doing that since June, but the only way we got to do that was all our churches in town. We got together and helped each other write policies, go back and forth with each other with the health codes and the fire codes and just breaking it up so it was doable for us. So we ended up with 4 churches being open, and we meet every week on Zoom, and we talk about how we can best manage the new things we have to manage, as well as how we can continue with pastoral care. And so I feel really privileged to be part of that ministerial.
How did that ministerial, has that ministerial been around for a while? Is it a new thing, or?
No, we've continued it. It's relationship building all the way along. It was here when I got here 22 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And then within the first 3 years, I was the longest serving pastor. So then it kind of dropped on my plate to keep it going, which is another unique thing about here is one of my parishioners calls it the Church of the Revolving Door. Mm-hmm. And because we're constantly saying hello and goodbye.
Yeah.
And that's another unique characteristic of the church here.
Well, it's a beautiful resort town, but as you say, for me, I'm sitting in a rural Saskatchewan, and I'm thinking, so is that really a small church? Is that really a sort of in a rural setting? How do you what is it?
Well, I did my doctorate at looking at our church in our context, and did it for how small churches can be welcoming communities for rural immigration, because we're also very multi-ethnic as a town because of the temporary foreign worker and people in the immigration process. A lot of our work or how we do church, like a lot of other small town churches, the people may not change very often. They'll still change because we're in a transient world. But you can come back in 6 months and 50% of my church might be new people. Just depending upon the changing of the season. It slowed down because of COVID, because we sent a lot of our temporary foreign workers home. But it's still it's still very transient. It's always saying hello to visitors, finding out who's actually visiting for the weekend compared to who's here for 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years.
Yeah. Now, that's interesting. And my situation in a small church is that there's a lot of relationship and a lot of family, and the church I'm currently working in, there's some people that go back 50, 60, 70, 80 years in the church. Well, it doesn't sound like that's what you would encounter.
We still have a handful of people that are established. I've got one family in my church that is multi-generational, like it's actually her grandfather started the church.
Oh, okay.
But their kids and grandkids are not here any longer, so that's kind of their third generation in the church. But at one time there was fifth generation in the church, but then 2 generations moved away, and now we're down to 3 generations. And most common in our church is 2 generations, just the parents and their kids.
Now, with this church, you say it has a very interesting ethnic mix. Can you name off some of those different groups that you would have in the church?
Yeah, I can. Predominantly, we can go with Japanese, Korean, Filipino, Spanish, German, and American.
Yeah, that's a whole ethnic group in itself. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And then what happens is something interesting, and why we're intercultural rather than a mosaic or a melting pot is we don't have critical mass of many folks where they're the only person who may speak that first language. And this is true, say, even of why don't we have a Filipino church, for instance, when they make up a good third of the church? Well, that Filipino group is broken up into 3 different major languages.
Yeah.
And so that critical mass becomes important, because regardless of which language they actually speak, they still come back to English, because that's the language they all know.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you how many languages you speak now, but it sounds like English is still.
English is 3 languages.
Okay.
I work with a Japanese missionary, and the Japanese culture, and this is an ethnocultural thing. The Japanese culture is a very insulated culture, and so it's very hard for them to come fully out of that culture.
Oh, okay.
And so it's easier for them, and there's a critical mass. For the longest time, they were the second largest ethnic group here, behind English and French. So they've maintained, they're thriving, they can survive in this environment and grow. I work with a YWAM base, and so that's in Korean language. And so for 4 months out of the year, we're bilingual in our morning service. So we do English and Korean, and if there's kids involved, we'll even have a bilingual Sunday school. So we try to accommodate the best we can, and just reach out to the people that are here at that current time. So it's kind of saying, the snapshot of the church today is not necessarily going to look much like the snapshot of the church next year.
Yeah, very much so. Which means you have to be very flexible along the way. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that flexibility is key, and that comes up to other things as well. Like in our ministerial, we're having a conversation of in this transient nature. How do we get succession in leadership?
Oh yeah. Have you got the answer?
Keep trying.
Yeah, keep trying. Okay.
Don't give up. and just a different mindset basically is as much as you're going to grow your church, you're going to grow many churches.
Yeah.
So just consider it a blessing. Even you're always blessing somebody else.
There you go. Yeah. Well, you've been there 22 years, so that's good to have that stability. But all the other churches you're talking about revolving, different people coming and going. what does that do for those churches? I've got about 3 questions to ask, but I'll start with that.
I don't want to speak out of turn because I'm not their pastor.
Mhm.
I think there's seasons, so it's circular. You kind of get a critical mass and you can do things, and then you lose that critical mass, and you just have to come back in and find the energy and just build it again.
Mhm.
It's sort of a lot like campus ministry, I think, where your people are going to be going, but you still want to embrace them fully so they can grow.
Yeah.
And not just say, well, have a seat, don't do anything.
Yeah. That's probably the worst thing you could do is just, yeah. Wow. How well do all those groups work together?
That is the $1 million question.
Oh, good. I'm going to make money today.
It's for the most part, when it's relationship with Jesus Christ, we work well together.
Mhm.
But there's always that cultural baggage we hold. For instance, with the Japanese and the Korean, especially with some older folk in the Korean community, there's a little bit of animosity and hostility,
Yeah.
because of past wrongs.
Mhm.
And so we kind of catch that and flag that as quick as we can and have conversations about that. This is the biggest gift we give as leaders is we can help people process things that they may not be processing, and by giving a language, a forum to be able to speak what they're feeling, and it's been very helpful as we've had many South Koreans come, especially pastors, missionaries, and they can process some of that in a safe environment, understanding, that was my grandmother's story, or that was my mother's story, but it's not my story now. It's where I've come from. But these are my brothers and sisters in Christ. And I can create relationship. I can create something new.
Yeah. That is a whole area that I'd love to explore, that whole question of cultures and changing culture, helping to change a culture and ones that we come out of, and that type of thing. I'm not sure I have a good big question on that, other than
I would say don't change culture.
Okay, let's hear some more.
I would say don't change their culture, but create culture. Okay, the Bible talks about this. This is coming back to my doctoral thesis as well, is it's Ephesians 2:19 through 22, where Paul landed in Paul talks about Ephesus church, and he tells them, you are citizens, you are family, you are a temple.
Mm-hmm.
And there was great wisdom in that, because Paul's calling them forward to something. And he first talks about citizenship, that we all have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
And then he talks about family, that in Christ, not only do we have a voice, we also have acceptance. And then he talks about a temple, not only a voice and acceptance, but then we have a purpose. We're going towards a goal.
Yeah.
And then understanding that in broader terms, that there's people are at different points in relationship and different points in their life. Sometimes they're only in the church because they want a voice. They just want to be seen. Mm-hmm. I exist.
Yeah.
And to there's a tension there, and sometimes that's all we give people, is we just say, yeah, I see you, have a great day. And then there's those that want something more. They want family. They want that acceptance. And especially here in the immigrant community, you do not have extended family.
Yeah.
Your family is thousands of miles away. And so you're living in different time zones. You're living in a tension that can be quite overwhelming. And so as a church, we can give that acceptance and that forever family. And part of that family and that acceptance is not trying to change them, not trying to make them more Canadian and less something else. That's not what they need at this moment.
Yeah.
And so you help them navigate where they're at. And then there's still that purpose that we're calling them forward. And this is can be a very frustrating thing in a small church, is calling them forward to purpose to build something and to have that passion, but understanding with that revolving door that you're calling them to a passion and building in Christ, but they may never build your church.
Yeah.
Because you've got them established, and then all of a sudden their dream, their home is across Canada.
Yeah.
And you have to let them go, and you have to let them get established, that you'll still be their family.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still part of the kingdom of God. And so we have what we call kingdom partners.
Oh, okay.
And it's trying to keep that relationship long after they've gone, to keep those doors of communication open.
You're actually starting to answer the question that I was going to say. When you have a network like this, to drop a person off or abandon them is the last thing you want to do. How do you keep that up? So keep going.
Well, instead of letting them go, we send them.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Like to say, listen, this door is always open. You're always welcome, and however you can connect. And COVID's actually given us a huge opportunity to connect, because now we were forced to be online.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got a lot of our former folk, our kingdom partners that tune in from literally around the world. And because not everybody came here, got citizenship or got their permanent residency. They came here to work. Mm-hmm. And so we can maintain contact, and through that we try our best online before and after to have that chat feature working, and even include them in our testimony time with the congregation, that if they like, they can type in a prayer request or a testimony, and we'll read it out and share it as a congregation. And we're finding that's been really, really helpful to just continue with that sense of community that people are desperately, why they're coming. It's community with Jesus Christ, but it's also with their brothers and sisters.
Yeah. And this sort of also brings up something that I'm seeing more, is that people are asking the question, what is the church? Who is the church? And we used to think, well, it's the church building and as many people as you can stuff in, that's your church. It seems like we're exploding to a different definition of church, and maybe yes, our old one was way too restrictive or something.
And I like that we're changing it, because it was frustrating. It's really frustrating, I think, for small churches, small towns, rural, to use a definition of church as noses and nickels.
Yeah.
Because we're growing, but we never grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The budget never gets bigger, and the attendance never gets larger.
Yeah.
And yet the completing of the mission that we're called to keeps on going. And we can look at the fruit of our labor, and I do that quite a bit with my church leadership, is look back 5 years, look back 10 years, mm-hmm, and look what we've done. Look at the fruit of our labor. Look at the folks that have come through and where they are. That sort of thing, because there's times where we have great critical mass, and it seems like everything's going great, and one year half the honor roll was our youth group, and and then 2 years later we have 2 kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Or even looking at it exponentially, if you've got 15 kids in your Sunday school, you're actually exponentially larger than a lot of city church Sunday schools. Well, yeah, because you're in a small town.
Yeah, exactly.
Are they reaching 10% of their city?
Yeah. Small church, I just so enjoy the small church and figuring out a healthfulness and a flourishing and all that type of thing that comes with the small church, that we miss in trying to group large numbers and just call it numbers. Yeah, it sounds like Banff is a great place to. I mean, it's a great place to live.
Yeah, I'm not complaining.
Yeah, I noticed that. But it could be discouraging. It could be, yeah.
Yeah, there's discouraging times too. That don't get me wrong. You know, one of the best advice I ever got from a mentor was don't quit on Monday.
Right, exactly.
So it's good, and what's here is with the longevity and stuff is we make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But the good news is we can fix mistakes.
Yeah.
Or we can humbly apologize for mistakes and go forward. And you know, and especially when it comes to intercultural, I've made mistakes. You know.
Okay, are you going to tell us one of them, or?
Yeah, I'll tell you one because
Sure.
because I still want to. I don't know if she's still alive, but if I can, I'd love to just hug her and tell her I'm sorry. I wasn't here. I was in another place. I was staying with a Romanian family right about the fall of Ceausescu. And her mom came from Timișoara. And so because I'd spent a lot of time in Vegreville, Two Hills, Ukrainian country, I practiced my Slavic language on her. And so every morning I would say, Pacha, Baba.
Okay, I'm waiting to hear what the translation is.
Pacha in Romanian is peace.
Mm-hmm.
Baba in Ukrainian is grandma.
Yeah.
Baba in Romanian is cabbage head.
I love it.
So when they were taking her back and they said, well, how did you like the pastor? And she started crying. She goes, he's so mean. He called me a cabbage head every morning.
Yep.
So there's lots of mistakes like that. And then there's fun learning things. You know, I've learned how to use 3 different types of chopsticks and discovered that even if you don't like kimchi, it's just that kimchi, because kimchi is a process. It's not a particular food. Mm-hmm. And so there's lots of good kimchi out there. The worst I ever did in church is we were showing what intercultural is, and I set up some canopies, some tents inside the church. Mm-hmm. And then I hung different flags in those canopies and saying, that the canopy is actually, we're under Christ, and we choose to hang our flag under Christ. Except I put the Filipino flag upside down, so it meant a declaration of war.
Okay, that could do it. Yeah.
But fortunately, there was enough chuckles that someone told me immediately what I had done and quickly turned the flag right side up.
Oh. All right, the story. Yeah. Why would anyone want to be a small church pastor?
I think it's a call.
Okay.
And it has to do with my call. I grew up in a big city church. I grew up in a church of 600 to 800 people.
Ah, okay.
And then I got a call to Vegreville.
Oh, yeah, I know Vegreville, yeah.
And I was on 50 and 50, so Main Street. My first Monday there, and I'm just minding my own business, heading over across the street to the ATV. And the next thing I know, there's this old man nailing me in the shins. Mm-hmm. Sonny, I was talking to you. I'm from the city. People talk. I don't know them. I don't even look at them. Yeah. I realized this old guy actually wanted to talk to me. Oh. So became friends with him. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of my introduction to small town, small church, and just fell in love with it and realized the potential of ministry in a small church to be not only pastor of your church, but pastor in the community.
Yeah.
And being able to love your community exponentially more and effectively. as you build credibility, as you they see your love not only for your people, but they see your love for your neighbor. And it can be quite humbling as you go to the post office and someone you don't know says, "Hey, pastor."
Yeah, exactly. I get that every once in a while. And the day that I walked across the street with a red light, I was reminded that I walked across the street, the pastor, on the red light. Oh, yeah, yeah, they know you.
Yeah, yeah. But it's a privilege too, because people will come up and you'll be able to pray with them.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's some have told me they'll never darken the door of my church, but that doesn't mean I can't pastor them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Which, I mean, okay, we're starting into a whole other area that I would love to talk about. Do you know what? Our time's pretty well up, and we haven't really got started here. So,
Okay.
We may have to do this again. But
I'll do it again.
I would too. Yeah. Well, let me just say thank you very much, Kevin, for joining us here today. And yeah, just hearing about small church. And anytime I can look at Banff and the beauty of Banff, I always enjoy it. Who was the artist, by the way?
His name is Francis Savage. He was actually a cement truck driver.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he should have gone into art. Well, maybe he did go into art. Who knows? Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
I think he still does drawing. I think it brings him a lot of joy.
Oh, I can imagine it does. It brings me joy. I like what I see. That's beautiful. And
just one thing, I'm in Banff, but every small church, every small town, rural or urban, has a context.
Mm-hmm. Just
find that context and love in it.
Yeah.
And the Lord will make the way and make the room. And one thing I had to get over was my church doesn't look like any other church.
Mm-hmm. And
that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, you're right. I do have many more questions. Let's wrap it up here. This reminds me of my ethnic heritage marrying into a Mennonite group, where they say, you say at the dinner table, "We're going to go now," and 5 minutes later, you say, "Now we're ready to go." And when someone stands up 10 minutes later, then you walk to the front door, and then you say, "Well, we've really got to get going." You open the door, and then 5 minutes later, you're finally out to the car. You circle around out in a farmyard, and as you're coming by, you open the window, and you've got 5 more minutes of conversation before you leave town. So
my wife is going to accuse me of being Mennonite.
Oh, okay. There you go. Well, thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Ron.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.